If you're looking to upgrade your photo and video quality, but you don't want to break the bank, this is a camera you should consider. Your phone is one of the easiest yet best cameras to use. Some of the only downsides with it though is that it can easily cost up to $800 to have enough memory to get started. Not to mention if you're willing to offload your footage every now and then. I mean, how often do you back up your photos anyway?
Yet, if you want a higher quality selfie screen, you don't even use the front-facing camera, but the back one, since it's often the better camera. Hold on to your boba because Sony ZV-1F is almost half the price of the iPhone 14, got a selfie screen, bigger sensor, and gives you way more than what your phone's camera could offer you.
Hey fam, mga kapatid, I'm Mike, nurse photographer and videographer, and I make videos about camera gear as well as tutorials for new photo and video shooters. So the Sony ZV-1F, what does this camera really have to offer?
Let's start off with this button right here. This camera makes it easier for you to switch between photography, videography, and slow motion right away with a click of the button.
No more spinning dials.
Amongst the simpler buttons, we've also got a dedicated video recording button, which is usable in all modes. For those of you who are filming lots of products or any other subjects, there's also a product showcase mode.
Whether you shoot behind the camera or in front of it, it doesn't really matter when you're doing this because you can document and capture at whatever angle you want. You've got the flip screen that allows you to not only catch a selfie view for framing yourself, but also something to help you shoot overhead shots and down low shots. When you hold this in your hand, you'll easily notice how light it is. It's plasticky. Perhaps it also contributes to the affordability of this camera.
Regardless if one of your complaints about lugging around camera gear is additional weight, this camera weighs 8.1 ounces or around 229 grams compared to an iPhone 14 Pro's 7.27 ounce or 206 grams. Not bad. While holding the camera for video, you'll also notice that the camera's active stabilization is also great. It may not be as miraculous as the iPhone 14's active stabilization for those acrobatic filming styles, but this thing sure doesn't demand a gimbal for steady footage. It's great pairing the stabilization with a wide lens as it dampens the look of the hand jitters. Compared to the Sony ZV-1's widest lens, this time we have a 7.6mm or 20mm for full frame equivalent, which is much more suitable for vlogging. It's just as comparable to the iPhone stabilization nowadays. If having a fixed lens sounds too limiting, you have to know that we can punch into zoom at the touch of the screen. This is especially if you don't like to use the zoom rocker. This is not optical zoom, but clear image zoom. A much cleaner way to get zoomed in images without sacrificing a lot on the quality like you would through a digital zoom. You still have the choice of a digital zoom though, even being able to zoom at 4 times, but I'm more in favor of clear image zoom. When compared to the Sony RX100 series or the ZV-1, this camera maintains the lowest profile. Unlike the former cameras, since this lens doesn't physically zoom, there's no protrusion of the lens. This is great if you just want to fit this camera in your pocket or some small compartment in a bag. It's just too easy. Since this camera is good for vlogging, you're probably wondering what formats you can record this in. Well, we got up to 4K 30 frames per second, but if you're sticking to HD, you got up to 120 frames per second. You know, just in case you're into that slow motion magic. To add to this camera's usability for video, it's never been easier streaming to your computer with a single USB cable. No extra capture card needed. Just plug it in, go into the settings, and select this device as your webcam for streaming, or Zoom calls. To get more out of the photo capabilities of this camera, you can shoot your time lapses on this as well via their interval shooting. That you can access through the menu. And if you're into action sports or any other cool activity like that, you can photograph at 16 frames per second for continuous shooting.
As someone who has much bigger cameras, it's quite refreshing to just take this little guy wherever I want and not really have to mind about breaking my back.
It's a vlog camera, the behind the scenes camera, and the everything else camera.
I took this thing with me to Sony Creative Spaces in New York and it lasted me the whole day. A couple photos with clips of 1080p.
To maximize the sound quality, I sacrificed the low profile form factor by adding an external microphone on top. The Deity D4 Duo that can record in the front and back simultaneously. This camera has a microphone port and cold shoe, which is something you won't find on many other point-and-shoot cameras these days, especially at this price point. Another small, yet big detail is that Sony offset the location of the 1/4-inch thread on the bottom. You can put a quick release plate or even mini tripod here without blocking the battery and SD compartment.
Speaking of battery, one of the things I'm not a fan of is the battery, the NPF BX1. They've been using the same battery since the RX100 days, like the Sony RX3. I'll often shoot 4K when I can, but because of how quickly 4K can consume battery, I usually opt for 1080p instead. Fortunately, if you want, you can charge this camera through USB-C while recording, so you can still get the most out of it. In regards to overheating, I was able to record just over an hour in 4K with no overheating. It's just a matter of the battery life. As someone who creates both horizontal and vertical content, one of the most convenient features is how this camera automatically keeps the vertical and horizontal orientation without me having to change things in the video editing software. By the time I open my files on the computer, it's already oriented to the way that I shot it. If you're not wanting to edit on your computer but a tablet or phone, you can also transfer the files to the Sony Edge app.
One thing that I started looking for in newer cameras is the customizability with buttons. Are there custom buttons that I can change? How many different buttons do I have? Can I map anything I want to those buttons? However, because the physical layout of this camera is so simple, there's really not much to customize. But it's not a problem with this camera, as everything that you really need is just here on the camera itself. It's just a matter of mode switching with the press of a button. But of course, if you still want to be able to be fancy, you got picture profile options and a few buttons you can remap through the settings.
If you want to see how I program my settings for this camera, I'll be posting one soon, so subscribe and be on the lookout for that.
Another game-changing feature I love about this camera is the tally light. You know you're really recording because as you hit the record button, a big red frame appears on your screen and the tally light shows up.
Another reason to appreciate this camera over my smartphone is that this thing has a 1-inch sensor compared to the typical iPhone 7mm to 5.79mm sensor. This is going to improve your images in low light and even everyday shooting. I don't know about you, but I love bokeh. With a bigger sensor, you'll be able to get more of it due to more shallow depth of field. Something else that you'll appreciate with a bigger sensor is the image quality of slow motion. I'm starting to use S&Q mode a lot more, not just in this camera, but also with my FX30. I'm just loving it. You just go over to the setting and choose whether or not you want 60 or 120 frames per second, and the image just looks so good. One thing to note on the side is that while you can shoot up to 2 times zoom while shooting at 1080p 60 frames per second, you can only shoot 1.5 times zoom when shooting 120 frames per second.
Some disadvantages to note is that when shooting 4K, there's no 2 times zoom. So the most that you're getting is a 30mm full frame equivalent for a zoom. Again, this is a video-centric camera, so when taking pictures, you may have to change the screen brightness in the menu because you won't have a viewfinder to take your pictures and block the sun at the same time. For me, I can live with that. However, I can't wrap my head around how feature-rich this camera is. But it doesn't shoot RAW photos. Most of Sony's other point-and-shoot cameras shoot RAW photos, except for this one.
Shoots 4K, but doesn't shoot RAW photos. With this limitation alone, this is really becoming quite comparable to the camera features of a phone. We can still shoot and edit JPEGs if we want to, but having that option to get cleaner and flexible data with RAW photo format from a dedicated camera is much more preferable. It's fine to be able to shoot and edit JPEGs if we want to, but I just want the editing flexibility with RAW file formats. Although this may not be a deal breaker for me, this just screams how Sony is really making a move for video-focused cameras. All in all, I don't know what the F stands for in the ZV-1F, but at this point I'm referring it to as the Feather, one of the lightest point-and-shoot cameras in the market. I believe this is for the individuals who are just trying to get into photography and video without breaking the bank. It's a great tool for getting into content creation with an all-in-one package. It's got photo, video, and you can plug in your own microphone if you don't like the one on here. If you want to level it up a little bit, you can get a sizable 128GB memory card, tripod, and an external microphone. If you want a better idea of what that kit could look like, just check out the link in the description for my ZV-1F kit. You see, you don't have to spend $1,000 on a big DSLR setup with a lens, memory card, and tripod. Just get this, and you're ready to start documenting your life and creating content without cluttering up everything on your phone. When compared to the other cameras around its price point, it stands out as the most affordable, powerful little camera from Sony. Click over here if you want to see what my settings are, or click over here to find out what a more serious camera is all about. Thanks again for watching. Now go out there and shoot for the life that matters. See ya!